to party.
So, in 2011, Bridesmaids was released, but I myself didn't see the film until 2013 after a friend recommended it. I had never even heard of the movie before, so I watched it without any external opinions influencing my views of the film, and, well, I loved it. I mean, I was a teenager and I was not exactly the target audience for the film, but I still found the movie super relatable. And you know that moment after you watch a film that you really enjoyed and you want more, so you Google movies like XYZ? Well, I did that, and at the time there wasn't much, and so I just moved on and forgot about it. Looking back now, it sounds so ridiculous to me that up until 2011, raunchy female-driven comedies just weren't a thing. Come to find out that it took a movie like Bridesmaids to be successful for Hollywood to finally rethink the whole women aren't funny concept.
Because I went to the fucking salon with her, and I got my asshole bleached too, and I love my new asshole!
So, Bridesmaids might have given Hollywood that final push to rethink the whole women aren't funny label that had been plaguing the industry since the beginning of time, but it wasn't the first female comedy to be successful or to be memorable. You can trace back to films like The Women released in 1939 as testaments to how good, successful, and well-received female-led comedies could be. The film has been praised for tackling divorce, the dynamics of female friendship, and its subtle but important absence of men in the story. Years later, you could look to successes like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, released in 1953, or comedies like 9 to 5 that, despite being released in 1980, still very much resonates with the workplace issues we're still fighting today. The film tackled workplace harassment while using comedy to highlight the impact female leaders can and should have in the workplace, and most importantly, the equality they deserve. The film was a critical and commercial success, grossing about $104 million at the time, which would be about $340 million today. The film ranked 74 in the American Film Institute's 100 Funniest Films. A television series based on the film would run for 5 seasons, as well as a Broadway musical. Ronald Reagan wrote in his presidential diary that he found the movie funny and only criticized the one scene where the characters were smoking pot because it was, and I quote, an endorsement of smoking pot for any young person who saw the picture. Regardless, the film was a smash. Heathers was released through the backbone of the rise in 80s teen movies and was essentially one of the last in its category. Heathers was deemed a commercial flop in its initial release, but has now become a cult classic. The popularity of the film has only continued to grow and is greatly adored by this generation and will most likely keep growing in popularity. Similarly, the 2014 comedy Mean Girls followed the traditional female comedy template down to the color palette. The movie was dubbed the 2000s Heathers for its setup and satirical approach of societal commentary. The Mean Girls movie grossed a total of $125 million worldwide against a $17 million budget. The audience was 75% female and 50% were under the age of 18. However, 80% of men surveyed about the film at the time gave it a positive rating. These films have left a lasting legacy in pop culture. The quotes from these movies have gone on to have a life of its own. October 3rd is official Mean Girls Day. The Heathers film is amongst the most cited on the Oxford English Journal, and don't even get me started on the quotes from Mean Girls.
So if you're from Africa, why are you white?
Oh my God, Karen, you can't just ask people why they're white.
So when you search for these movies, you'll find that they're under the category of comedy because it's undeniable that they're comedy films. However, all of these films get more recognition for being under the umbrella of chick flicks. The phrase chick flick was initially used to describe movies with heavy erotic elements. With the release of the 1989 film Steel Magnolias that featured a heavily female cast as well as a largely female audience, the term chick flick was rebaptized as movies about women for women. The thing about the term is that any kind of movie, no matter what the subject matter is, will be thrown into the boiling pot of this chick flick category if it so much as just smells a little female. It's absurd that movies like The Notebook, Titanic, and Clueless are thrown into the same categories as movies like Thelma and Louise or as the 2014 drama film Wild. When it comes to female-centered films, the ones with a romantic base otherwise known as rom-coms, have been and still are the easier films to sell to Hollywood higher-ups. If it's a comedy, that's usually not enough. It has to be about a love story, and only then can you add your touch of comedy. Hollywood has long time refused to accept the fact that people want to watch women be funny, that women do have something to add to the table. The worry has always been, well, if we make this, will men come and watch the movie?
I like
He
that.
also told you need dental work. He's an asshole.
I don't need dental work.
Now, cut to 2011. Bridesmaids is released, and against most expectations, it's a major hit. The synopsis of the movie goes like this. Annie is a single woman whose own life is a mess, but when she learns that her lifelong best friend Lillian is engaged, she has no choice but to serve as the maid of honor. Though lovelorn and virtually penniless, Annie bluffs her way through the strange and expensive rituals associated with her position as the bridesmaid of honor. Determined to make things perfect, she boldly leads Lillian and the other bridesmaids down the wild road to matrimony, but not without a few bumps along the way. Now, the celebration of the film's success, though appreciated, felt patronizing at times. What I mean by this is that all the headlines were about how the movie proved that women could be funny too, how amazing it was that the movie was profitable. All the headlines around the movie became about how successful it was and how it exceeded expectations, and not about how good the movie actually was and why it touched so many people. Kristen Wiig and Annie Mumolo came up with the original screenplay over 6 days, but would keep making tweaks here and there over several years. They wanted to write about the experiences of women in their 30s. This was the stage of life where most of their friends were getting married and having babies, and with societal pressures and expectations, it's hard for anyone who gets to a certain age and hasn't gotten to where society says they need to be, regardless of the subject matter. So they wanted to touch on the experiences of women in this stage of life. Bridesmaids does an excellent job at shining the spotlight on the maid of honor and how she may be affected by all the events taking place around her. Right off the bat, we see how much of a mess Annie's life is and how little self-esteem she has for herself. She's been beaten down by the loss of her business and subsequent loss of her partner. She's living in an apartment with roommates that she hates, and the only reason she has a job is because her mom worked something out for her. And she's sleeping with an asshole who wants her out of the door as soon as he's gotten what he's needed from her. In the first few scenes of the movie, the only time you see true happiness and serenity on her face is when she's with her best friend Lillian. A few moments into the film, we find out, along with Annie, that said best friend since childhood is now getting married and moving on to a major step of life and leaving her behind. From then, we get into the nitty-gritty aspects of being in a wedding party. We meet all the other bridesmaids who are all different from each other, but all seem to be more put together than Annie, especially Helen, who becomes Annie's biggest threat. Later, we discover that although the other bridesmaids seem fulfilled in their lives, most of them are actually pretty dissatisfied with their routines. Bridesmaids does a phenomenal job at penetrating the dynamics of friendship. It gives an excellent insight into the play that class, love, and envy have on people at different stages of life, and ultimately how it affects people's relationships. The way you treat others is often a reflection of how you feel about yourself. Helen and Annie are polar opposites on the surface, but still end up aligning in their attitudes. They both have the same end goal, but have different ways of one-upping each other based on the advantages they have. Helen has money and can keep dazzling Lillian with over-the-top gifts that Annie could never pull off, but Annie has a lifetime of experiences with Lillian and knows her better than anyone and can therefore give her things that Helen could never even think of. The tension between Annie and Helen is not only based on a clash of personalities, but on a power differential. The more subtle tension between Annie and Lillian is fueled in large part by Lillian's upward mobility. To put it concisely, this film was not just some story about women that succeeded by fluke. It was an emotionally perceptive film about the dynamics of friendship, class, and money with all the anxieties it can induce, envy and midlife despair. Sure, the movie featured the unavoidable romantic subplot, but amongst everything happening with our characters, the romantic aspect is buried far beneath all the other disastrous events Annie takes part in. The movie is comedy in its purest form and deserves all the praise it gets. And amongst other things, the film functions as a cunning satire of the wedding industrial complex altogether in its ritzy absurdity. Following the success of the film, we got a phenomenon known as the Bridesmaids Effect. Just like any successful genre, if one Hollywood studio releases something and it works, every other studio is going to jump on the wagon while it's still hot. Remember that intense couple of years in the early 2010s where every studio was releasing some kind of teen dystopian film? Basically, after Bridesmaids succeeded, studios were still unsure about female-driven comedies, and most at the time still believed that the success was an anomaly. Then Pitch Perfect came out and sealed the deal. In the following years, every studio tried to come up with its own Bridesmaids. In 2013, comedy drama The Heat, co-starring Sandra Bullock and Melissa McCarthy, was released and was the highest grossing comedy of that year, beating out We're the Millers. In 2014, we got Tammy and The Other Women, and both films were commercially successful. Arriving at the height of the era, we get to 2015, also known as the year women owned comedy, with releases such as Trainwreck, Pitch Perfect 2, Spies, Sisters, Neighbors 2, and Hot Pursuit. Now here's the issue surrounding the whole female-driven bracket of comedy blockbusters. The first one being that people totally missed the mark when it came to understanding the triumph of Bridesmaids. There were constant comparisons between the male and female comedies. People kept saying that Bridesmaids was the female version of Hangover, which, first of all, no, it's not. Film studios' takeaway from the film was that people want to see girls acting like guys or women's lives going in downward spirals. Movie makers would see scenes like the bridal shop fiasco and run with it. Don't get me wrong, it was a funny scene, but so was the plane scene, so was the engagement speech scene, so was the bridal shower meltdown. It was the build-up and the irony that made those scenes funny, not just that they all started pooping and puking in a bridal store covered in white marble from top to bottom. In fact, that famous food poisoning scene is one that even Kristen Wiig disliked. She and co-writer Annie Mumolo added it to the script at the insistence of the film studio, and it's understandable why they didn't want to add it. Most releases after the film lacked the authenticity that Bridesmaids had. It became about fulfilling a political agenda. Studios thinking that people wanted to see women do guy stuff is what led to disasters like the Ghostbusters reboot. I mean, imagine how tired we already are about all these Hollywood reboots and how they keep giving women these recycled stories. I mean, please, just tell me who needed a gender-switched American Pie. The second issue is that Bridesmaids was supposed to change the game for the female-driven comedy, but each new movie is still treated like a beta test for the genre. Let's wait and see how X movie does has become a common phrase in the press and the industry. Every so often, edgy female-driven material winds up being rejected by studios despite being well received by execs. They'll enjoy the script but reject it on the basis that no one wants to see women do this or that, or it'd be too much of a gamble for studios to release something like that. According to screenwriters, to this day, getting female-driven comedies to the big screen is as hard as selling Disney an X-rated movie. These screenwriters have shared that every movie feels like an audition for the world, yet no matter how many times a movie starring 100 men flops, they will never question the gender of the characters as being a factor in its failure. My last thing is the constant need to worry about whether or not men will watch the films. The fact that studios like Disney, for example, changed the title of Rapunzel to Tangle for little boys to want to watch it is not as innocent as it seems. It's a long-running theme that things aimed at women are regarded as less than, mocked, or just not acknowledged, and things being targeted towards teenage girls getting the worst treatment of all. Like, sure, a bunch of guys flying around in unitards is awesome and worth $1 billion, but vampires shining in the sun is pushing the limits of absurdity. Okay, movies like Mean Girls, 9 to 5, and Bridesmaids had on average 75% female audiences, and guess what? They still did really well and were all commercially successful. So who cares if men won't come to see the films? Women today are the most powerful consumers, and their place in the consumer market is projected to grow even more over the next decade. If some of these movies didn't do well, it's because they weren't authentic or simply because the story sucked, not because women were starring in it. Bad Moms was a great example of a good authentic female-driven comedy that set itself apart from all the nonsense attempts that were released that year. Girls Trip was another R-rated raunchy female comedy that deserved all the praise it got for being refreshingly good and funny. In conclusion, Bridesmaids did have a somewhat good impact on the industry in the sense where it semi-opened the eyes of the world regarding women and comedy blockbusters. However, instead of understanding what made the movie really successful and why people enjoyed it, film studios just started making female versions of male-dominated comedies that were already done before because they thought that's what people wanted. Today, some progress has been made, but we're still getting more gender-swapped remakes and reboots than authentic female-driven comedy blockbusters, and that sucks. Thankfully, every now and then we still get a few really good ones out of the bunch, and here's to hoping we get more in the near future. So this is where I stop today. Thank you for watching this video. Don't hesitate to share your thoughts down below if you agreed, disagreed, whatever. Comment sections down below. Like, subscribe if you want to. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.